Hello! Missouri artists George Caleb Bingham and Thomas Hart Benton have been important on the national scale during the two most important wars in American history. And guess what? They're both at the State Historical Society of Missouri, which is where we are right now. Bingham created the iconic Civil War painting Order No. 11 to depict the violent measures the Union Army took against counterinsurgency. Thomas Hart Benton's invasion painting from the Year of Peril Series depicts some pretty gruesome wartime propaganda during World War II. These are two wartime subject paintings from two Missouri artists, and neither shows two armies fighting, but an invasion into the private family life. In this, we will be looking at the implications for gender and race in this family-threatening dynamic.
George Caleb Bingham is an artist who created paintings of pioneer and small-town life in mid-19th century Missouri, and some will give us insight into how the enslaved and women share a public space, including the verdict of the people. Wynne Moskop wrote an article on its depiction of women being significant for the time, for showing their participation in the public and political space rather than the domestic space they've been pigeonholed into. Women in America, known for their participation in abolition and temperance, were very rarely depicted in artworks or illustrations as anything other than a godly, domestic person. These women in the painting defy this by occupying a separate, more virtuous space from the men, but openly participating in the realm of politics nonetheless. It's notable to mention that the likely enslaved individual is not portrayed so favorably, as it shows general passivity under an election which likely reinstated pro-slavery Democrats.
In the Civil War, due to a tradition of guerrilla warfare, violence was breaking out between citizens and harming the Union military's operations, and so they decided to do something about it. General Ewing promulgated Order No. 11, a policy which dictated that 4 counties on the Missouri border must be depopulated to better control this territory. Bingham, being a staunch Unionist and temporarily instituted as the treasurer of the temporary Republican government of Missouri, defied his allies and painted a depiction of the Union Army's atrocities. Fire, looting, general chaos. These are the things that might come up to your mind when you're looking at this painting. But what's jumping out to you about the geographical location of gender? Women and children make up the civilians who are being tormented. They are led in carriages away from their homes and possession. And who's leading them but young and middle-aged men? Women, who during this time were the key leaders of the domestic sphere, are being brought onto the battlefield by evil Union soldiers. They're defying the family unit and bringing them into the warfare unjustly. See the sofa and table. Women are having to fulfill both domestic and physical protection duties, which Bingham depicts as heavily unjust. Women should not have to beg soldiers or hold their slain husbands out on the battlefield. This presents a situation that has upheaved gender roles disfavorably. Race dynamics have also been upheaved in this situation. The black woman on the left is seen consoling the white woman, likely her enslaver, and the other likely enslaved man and boy are seen leaving the scene, horrified at what these soldiers are doing to these white people. It's a juxtaposition. This is a technique known as a flip of hierarchy to better illustrate that the situation is exceptionally absurd and unjust. This flipping of racial hierarchy portrays that the violence present on the Missouri and Kansas border is particularly cruel because it has nothing to do with slavery. And enslaved people are the ones that are making it out relatively unscathed. This claim is supported as Bingham, in defense of his artistic attack on Order No. 11, verbally exclaimed his frustrations with black soldiers being put in charge of military operations. Hence, a flip of hierarchy. This whole portrayal of black people seeks to exclude them from the violence that is being done in the domestic sphere. Thomas Hart Benton is an artist also from Missouri. His works span from the early 20th century to the mid-20th century. He was a painter that was mainly concerned with showcasing the American worker and society through a new, modern American style known as regionalism. His catalog of artworks depiction of black people is relatively uncontested as favorable, often depicting them as laboring people and working right alongside white Americans. However, The women he paints has a much more complex history. Not only did he say this and paint this, he has a history of generally painting and speaking about women sensually. This has the consequence of often reducing them to only a person valued for sexual appeal. He shows them sometimes in maternal roles, but other than that, reduces them to the dancer, the waitress, etc. His painting Political Business and Intellectual Ballyhoo criticizes left-wing dogma and includes the words, the new woman. It can be inferred that he is mocking this feminist movement through this inclusion. The early 20th century saw women gain the power to vote, organize many of the progressive movement's actions, and leave their traditional roles in the domestic sphere. It seems Thomas Hart Benton was less interested in this ever-increasingly popular women's prominence outside of the home. Now, his paintings were often the subjects of rural life, industrial life, workers, and social scenes. War paintings were not necessarily his forte, but on the tail end of his notable career, he painted the Year of Peril series as a response to the attack on Pearl Harbor. The images range from dehumanizing characters, brutal violence, political speech, and obviously chaos. He was very upfront about it being wartime propaganda in his autobiography. These propaganda pictures, which were eventually deemed effective and used by the government agencies, were circulated a total of 55 million times across pamphlets, newspapers, posters, cards, and magazines, according to Benton. Therefore, this qualifies as another dramatically known example of war scenes which are depicted as taking place in civil life. Invasion is the most domestic scene out of all the Year of Peril paintings. It depicts a family farm being literally invaded by Japanese soldiers. You will see ships out in the sea in the background, but do not be fooled. This is Middle America, with the barns, haystacks, and overalls, but most importantly, with conservative domestic family values. These values are threatened by the killing of men, children, their doll and wagon, and of course the graphic rape of the centered blonde woman. Again, we see the sameness between the family unit and the women of the household as a target and the most vulnerable aspect of war. Yet, unlike Bingham's Order Number 11, this woman is not offered even the opportunity to defend themselves or their loved ones. There is no negotiation with the soldiers, and it places the virtuous and responsible role of women outside of the picture. Perhaps the reason why this woman is depicted as defenseless as she is because Thomas Hart Benton has used the same woman, or very similar women, in two of his other paintings, Poker Night and Achilles and Hercules. Both are fairly sensual depictions of women and treat them as objects of desire for men. This objectification, therefore, would contribute to Benton's skipping of all pretenses of other ways women would be harmed in this war or could be responsible for defending themselves. Similarly to Bingham, he's also presenting this war as a masculine affair, with a focus on male heroes and enemies in all of his paintings, something which women have very little responsibility over, but so much to lose. Benton further supports this in a press release on the Year of Peril from the University of Kansas City. There are no bathing beauties dressed up in soldier outfits in these pictures. There are no stockinged legs. There are no pretty boys out of collar advertisements to suggest this war is a gigolo party. War was a masculine, serious, traditional project. Women, in reality, had a bunch of responsibility during World War II, both in the military, where they held over 350,000 uniformed jobs, and in the wartime economy. This is not an ideal representation of women in this period. In terms of race, the Japanese people are clearly dehumanized to maybe the highest degree that you can get in art, depicting them as ape-like. Prejudice towards Japanese people, however, would be expected during this time with the outrage against Pearl Harbor, the fact that they were the predominant enemy the US was fighting, and institutions of government agreeing to send them to concentration camps. FDR initiated the policy, and the Supreme Court upheld it in US v. Korematsu, saying the rights of Americans with Japanese ancestry could be violated for the state interest of counter-espionage. Ironically, the Japanese-American family unit was much more at risk. Alright, so both these artists cover the subject of war in a way that brought the front lines directly to the family home. There are differences between them due to the separate eras. One might expect that the depiction of women as defenseless would decrease over time, but Benton's incredibly sensationalized picture would have been unlikely to have occurred in Bingham's 19th century. The dehumanization of black individuals and the dehumanization of Japanese individuals makes sense why they are chosen for their respective generations. The through lines, however, are strong. These painters made a strong case that war has and will come knocking to disrupt the domestic family unit. The family unit is marked repeatedly by the women of the household, the mother, the wife. They both seek to present war as both a masculine atrocity and a masculine responsibility, giving very little agency to women during those times. Therefore, they should not be drawn into the field of battle as they are portrayed, and non-white citizens are repeatedly excluded from this convention of the nuclear family, which must be protected. This dehumanization argues that they are not threatened by the approach of warfare and seeks to support a white supremacist hierarchy.